Welcome to the Dream, Plan, Start, Grow podcast hosted by Allison Turner. In each episode, we interview real, everyday entrepreneurs to learn how they got their start, what challenges they faced and overcame when starting the business, and what successes each has had. Welcome to the Dream, Plan, Start, Grow podcast. My name is Allison Turner. I am your host. I started this venture with this podcast really to showcase different entrepreneurs and how they got their start. Because what I find is everyone has a story, everyone has a reason they went into entrepreneurship, and some are much different than others. And everyone has had challenges, no matter who it is that started the business, everyone has had some kind of challenge. So today I have CeCe, is it Espeut? Is that how you say it?
Yes,
I said it right. I was going to
ask
ask that before the camera went on and I forgot. Espeut with us, who is a photographer as well as a videographer and a speaker. So first I want to talk about, I know you started the photography business first. And you have a very interesting story because I've listened to some other podcasts that you were on to get some of that backstory, but I figure I'll let you share. Why did you go into that to begin with?
Well, I want to say thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been amazing. We've known each other for like years, like a really long time. But I got my start because I ended up going to prison. I made some really bad choices when I was younger, ended up going to prison for 2 years. A year of that, I was in solitary confinement. And when people get a little antsy about that, I said, no, it was okay. I needed to be there so I could hear myself. I could hear my heart and know what I wanted to do, you know. So when I came home, even though I have a college degree, I ended up working at a breakfast restaurant. I hated it, okay? Let me just, $2.15 an hour plus tips. So my advice, please, viewers, please tip your servers. $2.15 an hour does not cut it.
No.
No. And I absolutely hated my life. And just decided one day, that's it. I'm going to be a photographer. And the funny story there is that another server was getting married. She came to me, she said, CeCe, I only have $500. Could you please be my wedding photographer? Very quickly, I figured out one wedding a week or $2.50 an hour. That was it. It changed my life forever. And so I have these points throughout my life where I can go back and pinpoint and say, okay, that's where I made the switch. That was the turning point for me. And that was it.
But did you have a background in photography before that?
Oh, yeah, as a hobby. A hobby.
So yes, you enjoyed doing it and never considered professionally necessarily.
Correct.
At the time.
I was doing weddings for my friends, but not charging. So she paid me $500 to do that wedding. That was like the best thing that ever happened to me at that period in my life. So yes.
Yeah, that was probably 2 weeks of work or something?
Actually, it was more like 3.
3 weeks of work?
Because it was $2.15 an hour, but not.
And if it was a breakfast place, there's no alcohol probably.
Right, there's no alcohol.
Not a lot of big tips.
Right, and it's not 40 hours a week. It was more like 15. So yeah. But
wow.
She made a change in my life.
Excellent. So from there, I know I've known you as a photographer. So you've done some headshots for me years ago. I know I've seen you at conferences shooting as a photographer. And then you've continued to expand and then add video to your business as well. So what prompted that expansion to add the video?
So surprisingly enough, when I decided to start my photography business, I went back to school for it. And at the time, digital cameras were just coming out. they were having video, and I said, okay, I don't know enough. So I went back to school and I did a 18-month course at McFadden Technical College, which is part of the Broward school system. I did the photography course, and then I did the TV video production course. And that really positioned me in the industry because I was one of the only women in the Tri-County area, Miami-Dade, Broward, and West Palm, and Palm Beach County. I was one of the only women at the time who knew both photography and videography on a digital platform. So, go to school.
Always keep learning.
Right, always keep learning.
I know that's one of the messages I think on the podcast I'm bringing out this week is always keep learning.
Right.
So what challenges, so when you started the photography business, so I'm going to go way back, so you came out of prison, like you said, you started in working for a diner as a server, and then you went to photography. So what challenges did you run into when you first started the business?
I think the challenge that I faced was that I treated each event as a job, so I didn't necessarily make friends. Okay. I showed up, I did what I had to do, I stayed behind the camera. And then I got really good at doing events, at doing weddings, at food photography. Oh my gosh, I love food photography. And at one point, any restaurant that was along US 1, I had done their pictures on their menus. And so I became really good at that. People would always come to me for headshots. And there was a group that I belonged to. And when I told them that I did weddings, they were like, no. You need to do headshots. You need to do headshots because more people need headshots than get married.
True.
Right.
It's a higher ticket price on the wedding, though.
Right, but if you get married now, you're probably not going to get married next year again.
Hopefully not.
Right, hopefully not.
Hopefully not, otherwise we got a problem with that.
Right, we got a problem. But if you do headshots, then next year, you'll probably need headshots again. Yeah. And so will your friends. And so they really taught me about business strategies. That you don't have to go out after that big ticket item. You can, have a solid base. So that's how I really got grounded with photography and video. Yeah.
No, that's good. So basically from the time you started, then from a marketing perspective, it sounds like the main challenge was you treated each thing as a job. So maybe didn't quote unquote network at the event, or at least be outside and introduce yourself to people that may need your services in a different capacity.
Right. So what ended up happening is people knew me as a photographer, but once I put down the camera, I would walk into a room and people would go,
"Who is she?"
You look familiar. Like, who are you? And then I would actually have to go make the camera similar. And they go, "Oh, you're the photographer," which is exactly what happened to me when I joined Toastmasters. I joined Toastmasters just to learn how to tell my story. And people are like, "You look familiar." And I'll never forget, there was somebody there who said to me, she was like, "Oh, why are you here?" And I was like, "Oh, I want to learn how to speak." And she goes, "Really? Then you need to put down the camera." And I was like, she said, "Because as long as you have the camera in your hand, people are always going to associate you with that and never consider you as a serious speaker." So
interesting.
I had to separate those two parts of my life.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about that, but I mean, you have always been, at least since I've met you, very well branded with the camera. And even the photos I see online, a lot have been with the camera.
With the camera.
So it's almost like that crutch type of thing. So you branded yourself very well from the standpoint of a photographer, but maybe not as a speaker.
Right. And speaking was only something that I did because different groups were asking me to come in and tell my story. So so I go back to prison all the time. No big secret there. but I needed to know how to tell that story to those people. And so, I needed to tell the story. So it was two separate things. People who knew me as a speaker back then did not know me as a photographer. And in my photography world, people did not know that I spoke. So I kind of had to marry the two. It was two separate people.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So two different audiences.
Different audiences.
Completely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I find that is there a lot of times when people are in kind of two different pieces. I mean, a lot of people know me, for example, from the online marketing side, but they don't necessarily know about the business coaching side. And some of that's how it's been branded and whatnot, but it's trying to figure out how to marry those two. So
Right.
It's a combination as opposed to either or.
Yeah, right, correct. So, yeah.
Now you mentioned Toastmasters, just for those in the audience that maybe have heard Toastmasters but don't really know what it is. What is Toastmasters?
To me, Toastmasters is one of the greatest organizations that you can belong to if you want to learn how to speak in public, if you want to learn how to be more comfortable, not say the ahs and ums, not be at a loss for words. Toastmasters is the place to join. And there are 17,000 clubs worldwide, so that's my
There's
plug.
no excuse.
Right, there's no excuse.
And everything seems to be still Zoom, at least in this area, Zoom oriented or hybrid. So there's really no excuse
Right.
because we've had members that are in like North Carolina in a Florida group.
Right, and I mean, I speak in Malaysia, I speak in Bogota via Zoom.
Wow.
So, and I couldn't have done it had I not had the foundation and with Toastmasters. So, yes.
And I know for me, when I looked at it, I had heard about it a few years ago, and then I was like, oh, I'd never do that. Like, what do I need? What do I need Toastmasters for? And then last year, when I started looking at the speaking world, I was like, well, maybe I should try that out. And so I started looking at it, and I joined a club last year. And little did I know when I got around to going back to the podcast, because I'd started this podcast back in 2020, a little different take on it. It was just me speaking. It was audio only. There's no way in hell I was doing video, like zero way. And it was like 10 minutes. I'd mirrored it off of another business coach that I liked, that I had been listening to his podcast. And then I went into Toastmasters. That's probably the only reason video got added here, was because all of a sudden I became more comfortable on video because I was doing all those things on Zoom and getting feedback from that. And I know Jack will tell you, who's filming this right now, that when I did a video, when he and I first got together, when I did a video probably 5 years ago or something or more now, and he filmed it, and he literally had to edit it to a point where I wasn't always in the screen because so that's how good I was on video before. So that goes back to the education piece we mentioned earlier.
Right.
If you are not good at something, either find someone that is, but obviously speaking your own message really needs to come from you and not from someone else.
Correct. So, I have a funny story. You want to hear my Jack story?
Yeah,
Let me
I
tell
do
you
wanna
my
hear
Jack story. So, Jack, who is absolutely amazing.
Yeah, and again, he's filming this.
He's filming.
So he's on the other side of that camera.
Right. Many, many years ago, Jack hired me to do video with him in Orlando. And so I go and I'm standing behind the camera. There may be like 300 people or more in the audience. And Sharon Lecter from Rich Dad, Poor Dad is on stage. And she says something funny. I am behind the camera and I start laughing. I think silently. But Sharon Lecter looks at me and she stops what she's saying and she goes, oh my goodness, look at that camera woman. Now, all of a sudden,
All eyes are on you.
all eyes are on me. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my goodness. And Jack is standing behind me. And there's actually a picture that I'm definitely going to send you of this. And she goes, you need to step from behind the camera and be in front. That was a turning moment for me. That night I met her in the elevator. We ended up having dinner. Once she heard my story, she said, you need to learn how to speak. And that was the impetus for me to join Toastmasters and step out. And Sharon Lecter may not even remember that conversation, but it had such an impact on my life. And I always remember that had Jack not hired me, because I had the skills, because I had gone to school and I knew video and photography. And so you can only connect the dots backwards.
Right.
You can never connect the dots forward. So I always say, thank you, Jack. Thank you, Sharon Lecter. Had a huge impact on my life. So thank you.
And how long have you been in Toastmasters? No?
Since 2016.
Okay, so six years.
6 years, coming up on 6 years. And I'm a 3-time Distinguished Toastmaster.
Three-time?
So, 3.
Wow.
So that just means I give a lot of speeches. I get evaluated a lot. Sure, all my Toastmaster friends are checking to see how many ums and ahs.
I know. I listen to these back and I'm like, okay, you say a lot of you knows. What the heck is that? Less the ahs and ums. I'm pretty good at catching myself there, but I somehow say you know a ton, and I have to figure out how to.
It's okay to have I don't want to say a crutch phrase, but it's okay to have something that you're known for. It is.
I'm not in love with that one though.
Oh, okay. So
I'm trying to block that out, but I got to figure out how to do that and still eliminate the other side.
Right.
So you've gone on with the speaking career now. I know you're a TEDx speaker, and I know most people I know at least can recognize what TEDx means and being a TEDx speaker. So how did you become a TEDx speaker? Because I know that's a pretty hard process. I mean, a lot of people apply to do it, and very few are actually chosen as a TEDx speaker. So that's a huge accomplishment in my books.
Right. So it was, being a part of TEDx was an amazing experience for me. And honestly, I just applied. I applied, and somehow, the speaking gods just blessed me that day, and they accepted my application, which I think 850 people applied that year. They chose 13.
850?
I must have been like the last person they chose.
We gotta choose one more. Come on.
One more. And they chose me.
Do you have to send them the speech, like an audio of the speech,
no.
How
Actually,
do they choose?
And
It's just a paper digital
imagine?
application that just says what you're going to speak about.
Yeah.
But
yes,
no
that's exactly.
mention of like you being shown the speaking anywhere.
No. That is the miracle of what happened in that situation. So every TEDx event has a theme. My theme that year was reinventing yourself.
Okay.
So the idea that I was a photographer and I had reinvented myself coming from, my background with recidivism.
Yeah.
And so it just fit. And like I said, everything just aligned
up.
Right. And I remember, because everybody knew I was a photographer, I'm sure they thought I was going to speak about taking pictures or something like that. And it was hush-hush. They told me, they had me going around doing interviews. And they said, say that you're going to be a TEDx speaker, but don't mention recidivism.
Huh.
Right. And so recidivism is that cycle of when somebody ends up going back to prison, that,
right.
You get out of prison, you end up back. And so that was what my TEDx talk was about. But because I'm a photographer, everybody assumed I was going to be talking about taking pictures or something like that. And so it just really fit with their theme. And that's how I was chosen. So TEDx, Toastmasters, hey, I've got something going on with the T's. Love those T's.
What's the next T going to be?
Right. What is the next T going to be? Actually, I think I could do a marketing campaign around that. Right?
You
yeah.
could do a marketing campaign about that. I have to think of what the next T would be, but
Okay, yeah.
it's very fascinating now that you've gone into the speaking world. So how often do you actually speak? Because I know you're known as a speaker now as well. So it's not just that you gave a TEDx talk. I shouldn't say just, because that's a big deal, but that's not your only big accomplishment. So how often do you speak? How do you go about, because I'm sure someone that's going to watch this may want to be a speaker. Like, how do you even go about getting speaking gigs in this day and age?
All right. So good question. Really good question. So sometimes I will speak 2 to 3 times a week.
Wow.
Sometimes. And then other times I'll go maybe a whole month without speaking. It just really depends on
Ebbs and flows.
It's the ebb and flow of
Yeah.
life. And here's the thing, just like with photography or any solopreneur, you just have to realize that everything has a cycle. It's the ebb and flow of life. So if I don't have speaking gigs for a period of time, I'm okay, because I know that
It's flow again.
it's going to flow
It's in the
again.
ebb cycle.
Right. And I use those times to start developing new material. Right. Yeah. So I where before I was only speaking about recidivism, now I speak about the imposter syndrome. I speak about storytelling. Those are big things because people need to know how to tell their stories.
Right.
So yes.
No, that's great. But how do you actually get the speaking gigs? So we heard about the TEDx story and how you applied, but so when you speak 2 to 3 times a week, are these mainly local gigs? I mean, are you reaching out more nationally at any point, or are people reaching out to you? Because I know some speakers are well known enough that they'll get reached out to, and I don't know where you are. I don't know where you fall in the grand gamut of speakers.
So here's the thing. A lot of times people will reach out to me. They will reach out to me, especially if it's a very specific topic. Second chances. Basically, what I speak about falls under the heading of second chances.
Yeah.
But that being said, I'm looking for a good online marketer, so we might have to have a conversation after this. But I think most speakers are really looking for somebody to help market them, because there are plenty of speaking opportunities out there. Where I struggle is finding the right event to speak at, because not everybody is a good fit. I'm not a good fit for everybody, so yeah. Sometimes that's up and down. It's that ebb and flow of life. So, I put myself out there. When people say, what do you do? I have that elevator pitch ready, which, by the way, an elevator pitch is about 150 words and takes 1 to 2 minutes to say. So if your elevator pitch is 10 minutes long,
Too long.
it's too long.
We're going to tune out.
Right. Whittle it down to about 150 words. Yeah. So.
Now, the other thing as an entrepreneur, now that we've talked a little bit about the photography and videography, and then also the speaking, which are 2 different businesses, essentially.
Correct.
So how do you, as the owner of these 2 businesses, manage 2 very different businesses? Because obviously when you're going after, maybe you've been in the photography world long enough that they come to you more and you get a lot of the referral base there. But I assume there's still some networking that you do and whatnot to keep your name kind of in front of people, like we all do, because there is competition out there. Right. So how do you manage, like when you go out and network, do you lead with both? Do you just lead with photography, videography? Do you just, how do you kind of manage 2 different businesses from a, networking, marketing side and just day to day?
So first of all, I have a LinkedIn profile. And it says, Master Photographer, TEDx Speaker. Because guess what? Before any of us were speakers, we had regular jobs. We had regular jobs. You didn't, just come out of the womb and say, hey, I want to be a speaker, and, you hit
Hire
the ground
me.
running. No, that's not the way it happened. You had some kind of day-to-day job, and mine happened to have been a photographer, which now, because I've been in the industry, I'm going to say 40 plus years, I can say, and so for those of you who are trying to do the math, that means that I picked up my first camera when I was 2 years old. Okay, 2, all right? But yeah, so I brand myself, I am a speaker, but I also am a photographer. So it's hand in hand.
Okay, so you do go hand in hand, and that doesn't confuse the message. And the reason I'm going down this kind of track is that a lot of people are interested in a couple of different paths, and maybe they've started one path and then they've decided to branch into something else that may or may not be complementary to the first path.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I've got you.
So-
So here's the thing. When I came out of prison, that was a very hard story for me to tell. It was embarrassing not only for myself, but to my family. So I did that because then I could just come in, do the photography, not have to speak to anybody, because I could always put on a set of headphones and say, hey, I can't talk, I'm listening to video. Half the time, I just was too embarrassed to speak to anybody, all right? But as I had to tell my story, that's when I came out into the speaking world. So when I go to places and I'm speaking about second chances, I tell that story. Off of that first $500 that I made to do that wedding, I took $50 and bought a business license to start my own business. That way I didn't have to explain to employers, hey, I've been away, just came out of prison. It's not a good way to start a conversation with anybody. So I did that so that I wouldn't have to talk to people. And then, so now it fits. I crafted my story so that it flows. I could tell people I started my own business, so I didn't have to explain the gaps in my past. And that's how it led me to speaking. So that's, you have to be able to describe your story, your narrative.
Mm-hmm. No, that's true. Now, I'm going to switch gears for a minute.
Okay.
How does family play into your career? Because I know sometimes when people start businesses, family are very supportive. Some families are not supportive. How has family, I guess, played into your career? Has it had any impact as far as positive, negative? And she laughs. I don't know what that means, but
all kinds of great stories there. I love my mother. But my mother prays every day for 2 things. One, that I get a job. And 2, that I find a good partner who will take care of me. That I will get married and yeah, I'm like, Ma, really? I'm like, people fly from all over the country for me to do their headshots, and my mother prays every day
to get a good job.
that I'll get a good job. All right.
My mom's not quite that bad. Although she's like, I really don't know what you do. Like, I can see you link to the website. I mean, how do you want me to break it down any further for you?
But mothers, you've got to love them. And so when I started speaking and I told my mother, especially when I did the TEDx talk and I invited my mother to come and I told her what the subject was going to be, and her church sisters, God bless their souls, they said, your daughter's going to embarrass us on stage. And I was like, Mom, it's my story to tell. I have to tell it, because even though it happened to me, it was to benefit others.
Right.
you can have a life after you've made a mistake. And so now when I tell my mom, or like on a Friday or Saturday night, she'll say, "So what are you doing?" And I'm like, "Mom, I'm going out on a date." She says, "Shh, don't tell them you've been to prison." And I'm like, "Mom, that's my calling card." Like,
All they gotta do is Google.
all they gotta do is Google me and they'll see. And she's like, no, don't tell anybody. And I'm like, "Mom, that's the story I usually lead with. That
Right.
way," and even with my clients, who come to me for photography, in the first part of the conversation, I'll say, "Listen, if you Google me, you'll see that I've been to prison, but I want you to know that right up front. So if you decide not to work with me, you know why. Because I don't want anybody to ever be embarrassed. We're out having a good time, I'm doing their pictures, and then somebody comes and says to them, 'Oh, she's been to prison.'" It's like, but my answer to that, my response to that is, what is it? 2 out of every 3 Americans, or 1 out of every 3 Americans, has sat in the back of a police car. So
That high? Wow.
a lot of people have
Wow.
criminal records.
Right.
Right. And if you've sat in the back of a police car, you've got a criminal record with the Department of Justice. And that's according to a 2012 survey that they did. So I just spend a little longer with the Justice Department than most. That's it. That's it.
That's been as long as some people, though. Some
Right,
people
well-
are just in there for a much longer period of time.
Right.
So,
But here's the thing, and when I talk about recidivism and second chances or the imposter syndrome, it's to know that we should not be judged by the worst time in our life. When we made a decision where we were not at our best, we should not be judged for that forever, and that there's hope.
yeah.
You can rebuild a life from that. So
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So many people, I think, get judged from that one-off mistake. Now, if you start seeing a record over and over and over again, and then you run into that person, unless it's been a longer period of time, you probably don't want to go that direction.
Right.
But if there's been a long gap, even if there was some mistakes much earlier in their life, where they've really changed their life, then obviously that's an important piece, because unfortunately, I think our society just judges based on,
Correct.
a paper versus like who that person is in
Correct.
today's day and age, and kind of what they've accomplished based on today, not how many ever years ago
Right.
that was.
Correct. So when I talk about clemency and getting your record sealed or expunged, because most people don't know what those terms mean, and most people use them interchangeably. And so if you go to the state attorney's office and you say, "I'd like to get my record pardoned," they're always going to tell you no. Because the state attorney's office does not pardon records. They can
Expunge
only
records,
start you on the process of sealing or expunging. And so it's those subtle differences of the words that we use. Right? Words really matter. And you have to use the right word in the right context, or the answer will always be no. And that's why I wrote that book, The Florida Clemency Guide, to start explaining.
God, she's an author too. Forgot that. Sorry.
No, but that's and in that book, it starts talking about the difference between jail and prison. So I would have people call me and say, "Oh, little Johnny went to prison this weekend. I've got to go pick him up." And I'm like, "Really? No, Johnny went to jail. Right? Prison, you stay there for a long time." So little things like that make a big difference. So when you call a lawyer and you say, "I need the record pardoned," or "I need the record sealed," when you've been to prison, there are nuances. There are a lot of nuances to that whole process. And people get stuck. And then they think they don't deserve a second chance. They start suffering with imposter syndrome. They think that their only option is to go back to prison. It's not, There are ways around that when you if you make a mistake or one or two, you can still change your life.
How hard is it, and you could answer this question far better than I can, or is it to, when you come out, as far as options for someone coming out of prison? Because I know while you worked at the diner and then you jumped from the diner to photography and basically your own business, and at that point you can control everything. How hard is it, even in this day and age, if you're coming out, even if it's a short stint, a year, 2 years, so something small, not huge,
Right.
to then get hired from someone, get a job that actually can support you and not a minimum wage job, which is not going to support you
Right.
in most places, in this state at least.
Right. So it really depends. It depends on what you were convicted of, not what you were charged with, but what the actual paperwork says. So keeping that paperwork is extremely, extremely important. I tell people, put it in your safe deposit box, put it somewhere safe, because you will be asked about that when you least expect it. All right? So depending on what you were convicted of really determines what happens afterwards. And then you just have to really make some choices. If you want to, say you have a kind heart, you want to work with in the medical field, but you have a felony conviction, depending on what you were convicted of, you might not be able to do that.
Okay.
But suppose you decided to own or buy the building that the nursing home is in or the medical facility is in. You could still kind of be on the fringes of that.
Not the day-to-day operations.
Not the day-to-day operations. Or suppose your background, you want to do marketing, online marketing. You could do online marketing for medical facilities or nursing homes. Mm-hmm. You're on the fringes, but not the day-to-day operations. Okay. So things like that.
And what if you come out and say you don't, like before you went in, you have a few skill sets, but you worked more minimum wage jobs, things like that, and now you're coming out and you've thought about A, who's going to hire me, B, what are my options? And I'm really kind of gearing towards the entrepreneurial journey here of how hard do you feel it is? Because even in what you do, the photography industry, buying photography equipment is not cheap. So if you don't have the money or can borrow the money from a family member, at least to buy a semi-decent camera and lens to start with, just to like get you going, and then there's still like the business license and all the other wonderful stuff.
And insurance, let's not forget the insurance.
All that stuff that goes with it. So you're still probably talking, and I'm going to probably lowball this because I know photography equipment's super expensive, like the really good stuff, but like even like $5,000, let's just say, just to get a starter kit.
Right, to start a camera, right. That's the body of the camera, not the lens. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. And the lenses are super expensive usually too.
Right.
But like, how hard do you feel it is for somebody to come out with maybe less skill sets, but maybe they have hobbies, like you had hobbies, but with less of a, no budget to then start a business, even if it's a service-based business or something else, like to kind of reinvent themselves, which is your message. How hard do you think that is in today's society?
It can be challenging. Now, I already had my camera equipment before I ever, went to prison. So you have to be realistic. And I always say, you start planning your exit from prison the day you go in. All right?
Good point.
There are all sorts of classes you can take while you're in there, online classes, classes that Department of Justice gives. I was in the federal prison system, so it's a little bit different. But even state prisons, they do have classes.
Okay.
They do have classes. And yes, I know they've cut a lot of the programs, but if you want it, it is there. Okay.
Okay.
So one of the things, if you don't have a high school diploma, use that time when you're away. And that's what we call it. We don't normally say I've been to prison. We usually say I've been away. It's kind of like the lingo.
Code name.
Right? Or if I say I've been to Club Fed. Anybody in the know
I've
knows
heard it called that.
Right, Club Fed, yes.
That's great.
And it's not a country club. But while you're away, start with getting your education. So, get your GED, get your high school diploma. And start thinking about what kind of business you want. All right? Mm-hmm. So that when you come out, you've got some kind of basis.
Right.
You're standing on solid ground. Then decide what you want to do. And it probably means that you're going to have to go back to school, get some technical training, but there are programs out there for that. Career Source has amazing programs for computer skills, resume writing, all of these things that you can get a job. Now, it may take you some time, a year. Many of their programs are within a year, that you can get a certificate within a year. And then you start slowly. It's the idea is how do you make a wedding cake? One cupcake at a time. Learn how to make a cupcake, then two, then it's half a dozen, until you get to the point where you can
make the cake.
So, you want to cut lawns, be a landscaper? Get one lawnmower, start cutting one property, and then move up. Yeah. And by the way, let me tell you this. If you are a minority, if you are a woman, if you are disabled, if you are an ex-offender, there are all kinds, or military, so 5 different categories. There are all sorts of set-asides or government programs that you can get where they will help you.
Okay.
Right. So
there's a lot of different options.
There are options. I'm not saying it's easy.
Well,
but
being an entrepreneur in general is not easy.
Not easy, right.
So that just adds another layer to
Correct.
the difficulty.
Correct. So when we were talking about getting your record sealed or expunged, that you can usually do within a year.
Okay.
Right? Getting your record pardoned or getting clemency can take a much longer time, but look at that time as preparation. All right? All these things that we've been talking about, going back to school, applying for grants, applying for different set-asides, government programs, building your business and your reputation.
Right.
All takes time. So if you come out of prison, and when I say second chances, it doesn't necessarily mean just prison. It can be divorce, it can be a failed business, you can be an empty nester. All of that falls under the heading of second chances. But if you want to do things differently, you've got to show up differently. So, nothing good happens after 11 o'clock at night. Don't be hanging out on the corner at 11 o'clock at night. Nothing good is happening. You need to be at home working that business plan, studying, looking up those grants.
So put yourself in the place for success instead of tempting the stuff that goes on, or tempting yourself if that is a temptation.
Right. Correct.
Being out after certain hours and things like that.
Right. Nothing good happens after 11 o'clock at night on the corner.
No.
Absolutely nothing. Nothing.
But I think that's an important message from the standpoint that entrepreneurship, I find, is so much mindset. Absolutely. And really being able to hone in on that persistence in the business.
Correct.
Because there is no straight path in general in entrepreneurship. There's no okay, I've started a business and it's just going like this. Apple's had their little side to sides, Amazon's had theirs. I mean, the big companies that you see are so successful today have all had their challenges, but they've figured out what they need to do to kind of zig and zag and improve and expand to get where they are today. It wasn't okay, we got this great idea and we go from here to here.
But do you remember when Amazon only sold books?
I do.
Amazon, when they started, they only sold books.
And that went up against Borders and
Barnes
and
and
Noble
Nobles,
and
right?
and the independent bookstores, and that was their first thing. And now Amazon's going against basically everyone, including the grocery stores.
Right? Yes, yes. So, you are so right. Being an entrepreneur, you don't start here and then just go up. It's a zigzag, and it zigs and zags.
And sometimes you go back down, and then you go back up, and then you go down. And like you said, the second chances include failed businesses. So sometimes an idea doesn't work, and you have to kind of restart that idea or restart a different version of that idea. Or maybe you had the wrong business partner. Maybe you had the wrong game plan coming out of the gate. Maybe something financially hit and you weren't able to, I know the last couple of years put some businesses out because of the shutdowns and things like that. Some of the restaurants I know particularly got hit hard, in this area. I think in all areas, because we weren't shut down as long as some other areas were.
But even just being an empty nester.
Yeah.
What happens when the kids go off to college or just move out or just graduate from high school and you're like, oh, so now, it's a totally different thing. Yeah. It could be sickness. There's just that second chance umbrella covers so many things. And so many times we start to worry thinking that, oh, do I really deserve that? You walk into a room with other people and you think that, everybody else is smarter, prettier, taller, slimmer, fatter than you, whatever it is. And it starts to mess with your mind. Right. And so when you say being an entrepreneur is a mindset, oh, absolutely it is. And you have to reinforce that for yourself daily and be around like-minded people.
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes. Reinforce it daily. Because something can happen in your business. You lose a big client, you don't get the big contract, whatever it is, and it can set, especially if you're a solopreneur or don't have a team, it can pull you here. And if you don't have that person or someone that can be like an accountability partner or a business coach or somebody that you can bounce stuff off of, it can be this slide and you have a hard time pulling yourself out unless you have kind of systems in place for yourself and figure out how to get yourself back out. Okay, that didn't work, but that's okay. I'm going to go this direction next, or I'm going to put this in play next.
Right, absolutely.
And it's got to be a quick change and not wallow in self-pity or whatever's going on down here. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges I see, especially with new business owners, because they're not used to that. And not used to that daily process.
Correct. And it's I always like to say the power of forgiveness. You have to be able to forgive yourself when you do things wrong, because you can only connect the dots backwards. You can't connect them forward.
Right.
Yeah,
that's so true. So as we start to wrap up here, if there was one thing that you would share to someone who wanted to start a business, and it doesn't have to be photography or speaker or anything like that, but just in general, they wanted to start a business that either maybe you knew starting out that really helped you, and maybe some people don't know, or maybe you didn't know and you realized a little ways into the business, oh, I wish I'd known that a year earlier, I would have excelled a little faster. What would that be?
Well, there are a couple things that come to mind. First of all, get a mentor. Get a mentor who has been where you want to go. So many times we listen to family members who have not done, can't even imagine some of the things that we are trying to do. And we listen to them. Why? So get a mentor. Listen to them. take what they're telling you and make it work for yourself. And believe in yourself. You know, God gave you the vision. He did not give it to everybody else. It was not a conference call. And my son told me that the other day. He said, Mom, God gave you your vision. It was not a conference call between, you and your friends. So, follow your heart. Believe in yourself. Right. Believe in yourself. And I would say, do it. I wish I had had the confidence to do what I'm doing now 10 or 15 years ago. I really do. I wish I had just gone for it.
Hindsight's like 20/20.
Right.
I think that too on certain things. I'm like, God, why didn't I do this like this many years ago?
Right.
If anyone wanted to reach out to you either as a speaker or photographer, or just to get in touch with you or have a question, what's the best way to reach you? Is it social media, website?
Actually, it is social media. I'm big on LinkedIn. If you send me a message on LinkedIn, I will definitely answer you. Yeah, that's the best way to reach me.
Spell your first and last name. In case they're listening to the audio side of this.
My name is CeCe, C-E-C-E, and my last name is Espeut. E as in Edward, S as in Sam, P as in Peter, E as in Edward, U, T as in Tom. And can I tell you a quick story about my name?
Real quick.
Okay, real quick. If you just hear my name, my first name, CeCe, in Spanish, it means yes, yes.
Huh.
Right? My last name, Espeut, in French, comes from the root word that means it's possible.
Huh.
So when you put my name together, yes, it's possible.
There we go.
My mother, thank you, Mom. Thank you for naming me that.
Is that intentional?
I'm sure she didn't know, but hey, that's the power of God and the universe.
Yep,
so,
exactly. So thank you for joining us today, CeCe. And thank you, everyone, for listening to the Dream, Plan, Start, Grow podcast. Again, my name is Allison Turner. CeCe Espeut is with me today. We look forward to seeing you again next time. Thanks for tuning in to the Dream, Plan, Start, Grow podcast with Allison Turner. If you like what you heard, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Join the Dream, Plan, Start, Grow community by following us on Facebook or Instagram @Dream, Plan, Start, Grow. See you in the next episode.